Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over the absurdity of Sahih Bukhari. Now, you might have heard that Imam al-Bukhari, who lived from 810 to 870, supposedly, reportedly, spent 16 years going over 600,000 hadiths. Think about that. 600,000 hadiths. And these included duplicates, weak and fabricated ones. Okay? Out of this 600,000, okay, he ended up with 7,275 or so, but that includes repetition, right? So there's only really about 2,600 unique hadiths, meaning they're not repetitive. Hell, we can see this crap in the Quran. The Quran is probably about 20-30% repetitive. So he spent 16 years supposedly compiling, reviewing, and organizing this work. Okay? Supposedly he performed their ritual washing and prayed 2 rakas before recording each hadith. So that's about 1.2 million rakas. All right. So let's go. In summary, Imam al-Bukhari spent 16 years reviewing the claimed 600 hadiths to compile his Sahih collection. All right. So I asked my good friend Giggles, a.k.a. my cousin, a.k.a. ChatGPT, do the math of how long he spent each working, do the math of how long he spent each working 16 hours a day. It's supposed to be he spent on each. I'm sorry. I didn't have enough coffee. All right, so 600,000 hadiths, 16 years, 16 hours per day. Now I'm being generous. I'm giving a guy 8 hours sleep, right? 1 year, 365 days. So we got 16 years times 365 days times 16 hours per day equals 93,440 hours total. If we take 93,440 hours divided by 600,000 hadiths equals roughly about 1.557 hours per hadith. If we convert the hours to minutes, you get 9.34 minutes per hadith. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a freaking world record. To only spend 9 minutes and 34 seconds to verify a hadith, that is a miracle. Alhamdulillah. Right? Now, this 9 minutes is supposedly reading and hearing each hadith. Now, let me tell you, some of these freaking hadiths are huge. I mean, it would take me more than 9 minutes to read it. Okay, I'm a really good reader. So let's say I spend 4 minutes. So in 9 minutes, I'm supposed to believe that Bukhari was reading and hearing each hadith, was verifying the so-called chain of trans bullshit, judging the narrator's reliability, which by the way, they're all freaking dead, comparing versions, checking for contradictions, and recording the results. Holy freaking moly. Wow. All right. Now, again, those 16 hours that I gave him would mean the dude never went to the bathroom. The dude never ate, never took a break. And obviously he had to travel to all these different locations to supposedly collect all of this stuff. So let's keep going. All right. What did chat say? Would you like me to show you how absurd it becomes if we factor in travel time between regions? Look at that. My man Giggles. knows my mind. It knew that I was going to go ask this question. All right, so Giggle says, would you like me to show you how absurd it becomes when we factor in travel time between regions? He supposedly traveled across Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, and Central Asia. I think he had his own personal Burak. All right, so let's take a look at that. And chat only took 38 seconds. Okay. He comes back and says, great. I ran the numbers and laid out a few realistic scenarios so you can see how travel cuts into the already tight time per hadith. All right, again, 600,000 hadith, 16 years, 16 hours a day, but that includes no pissing, no shitting, no eating, no doing nothing. No break for his camel smoking, all right? Now remember, 16 hours, no eating, nothing, just focusing on the hadiths was 9.34 minutes. Now let's factor in the travel. If he didn't travel, we still get the 9.34 minutes per hadith. If he did 10% travel, now he verified a hadith in 8.41 minutes. If he did moderate travel, 25%, now we get to the 7-minute per hadith. If he did heavy travel, 50%, now we get into the 4.67 minutes per hadith. And if the dude did some heavy duty travel, which we know he would have had to have done to go from those locations, we're looking at 3.74 minutes per hadith. Damn, the guy was good. All right. Ready. So we got all of this. I mean, we can be fair and let's give him 25%. All right. And we can remove the duplicates. So we have the duplicates would bring it down to 7 minutes, right? And using 25% travel time. Unique items, let's say we dropped it down to 300,000 instead of the 600,000. 14 minutes, a little bit better. If we dropped it even further to only 200,000, that would be 21 minutes each. And if we were really generous and said 50,000, right, it would come out to about 84 minutes or just an hour over 24 minutes. Now, we know that 50,000 is bogus. We even know that 200,000 would be bogus. I'd go with the 300 and the 600. All right, let's keep going. Conclusion, practical reading. On the face of the traditional claim, 600,000 reviewed in 16 years at 16 hours a day, you get 9.5 minutes per hadith. If Bukhari spent substantial time traveling, it could go down anywhere from 4 to 8 minutes, right? If you insist on counting the unique narrations, which is fewer than 600,000, the time can rise substantially, from 10 minutes to hours each, okay? But that requires showing how many unique items are involved, which we can't do. So either way, the math does not add up. The raw arithmetic shows the traditional claim is extremely tight time-wise. And that's not factoring travel or any of that other stuff. You know, maybe he stopped along the way for a little higgy, you know what I mean? All right, so chat said you want me to turn this into a table. I didn't really do that. But then I said, did he review written sources or oral sources, right? Meaning, did he have access to actually written hadiths from the people who supposedly heard Muhammad? Or was this a he said, she said kind of thing? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was more of a he said, she said kind of thing. You know what I mean? I know, I'm acting silly. All right, so Giggles came back and said, excellent question. And it's one that really cuts to the core of how Sahih al-Bukhari was compiled. The short answer is al-Bukhari review was overwhelmingly oral. not based on written sources, at least according to traditional accounts, meaning that's what the scholars say. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how do you verify sources from dead people? I really want to know. How do you verify a source from a man that's been dead 150 years, 75 years, 50 years, 25 years, and if the guy didn't leave anything in writing? You see, this is the bullshit of Islam. It's all based on oral traditions. I'm just supposed to trust that a guy 150 years later is actually telling me the truth. That, yeah, so-and-so and so-and-so, yeah, man, they were really trustworthy. Okay, so let's look at the Islamic tradition. According to the Islamic tradition, Bukhari traveled to Kufa, to Basra, to Baghdad, to Egypt, to Nishapur, to the Hijaz, and more. Okay, to listen to the Hadiths directly from living transmitters. Which living transmitters? It wasn't the original transmitters. It was transmitters of transmitters of transmitters of transmitters of transmitters. You know what I'm saying. He allegedly heard 600,000 hadiths. You know, I heard from so-and-so, who heard it from so-and-so, who heard it from so-and-so, that Muhammad said he took a crap. All right? And he only recorded a hadith in his Sahih after hearing it from a trustworthy isnad. Again, how do I trust isnads from people that have been dead? Now, remember I said the 16 hours he would have to do nothing? Well, that's not true, because according to this, forget about eating, forget about crapping, pissing, shitting. But he did perform the prayer and the little washing, right? So basically, he relied on oral transmission. Guys, the isnads are a joke. All right, his review is based on was from hearing and memorization based, not textual criticism in the modern sense. All right, historical and critical reality. Modern historians, Harold Motsky, Gregor Schuler, and even Jonathan Brown, who is a convert, points out by the 9th century, written hadith notebooks were already common. I'm going to disagree with that. Maybe the Mutawata by Imam Ibn Malik. Scholars would often hear a hadith by reading from or listening to a teacher read from his written notes. Notes that we don't have. Okay? Many hadiths were copied from earlier written compilations. Only problem is that we don't have those earlier written compilations. The Mutawata of Imam Ibn Malik is from the 9th century. About 100 years after the man died. We ain't got shit. All right? Let's go to the bottom line. What do we have? Mode of review. The traditional view is oral hearing and memorization. Critical historical view, largely written sources presented orally. Verification method, testing memory and isnad integrity. I guess they had, they had scientists and clinicians, whatever you call those guys that test your memory. All right. And so it's basically done by testing memory and isnad bullshit. Copying, redacting, and editing earlier texts. Evidence of written use. Downplayed or denied. Because Muslims don't believe in receipts. Oh man, it was memorized by 2 million people. Trust me, bro. Trust me, bro. They had perfect memories. They never forgot a thing. Spock, you tell Mr. Scotty to give me some more juice. I need some more juice. Critical historical view, strongly probable. Written notebooks and early collections clearly existed. I'm going to disagree. Again, these would have all come from the 9th century. All right, what's the conclusion? Up. Come on. Even if we take the traditional number 600,000 hadiths, it doesn't imply he personally heard 600,000 unique oral narration. Rather, it's likely refers to all versions of variants, meaning the daif, all of that other bullshit, okay? And variants circulating in written and oral form, but there wasn't that much of written, okay? Bukhari review was nominally oral, but functionally written. I don't know what that means. Supposedly, it's a hybrid practice disguised in oral terminology. I'm going to call that bullshit. All right. Would you like me to show a history of the timeline? So I said, what year did he start and how old was he? Because there are some sources that say he started at 16. Again, that's bullshit. All right. So here's a timeline. His full name was Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. Born 810, died 870. Okay. Age 60. That's not bad. Supposedly he began at around age 30, which is roughly about 200 years after Muhammad was dead. Okay. This puts the starting point at around 846. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. That's 214 years. My mistake. All right. His age. All right. 846. Around 36 years. Finished compilation at 62. 52. Right? Minus 16. 36. He died at 60. All right. Summary, blah, 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 blah. All right. Okay, would you like me to lay out a chronological table? Yeah, sure, why not? All right, so here we have the, So here we have the timeline of where he traveled. 810, he was born in Bukhara, which is Uzbekistan, about 2,600 miles away from Mecca, right? He wasn't an Arab, he was a Persian, okay? At the age of 10, he was still in Bukhara. Age of 14, supposedly went from Bukhara to Mecca with his mother and brother to perform Hajj and kiss the black stone. From the age of 15 to 20, he was in Mecca and Medina. He studied under the scholars like Abd Allah ibn al-Zubair al-Humadi. Okay, whatever. From 20 to 25, he was in Basra, Kufa, and Baghdad. I mean, the dude had a lot of time to travel. All right. 28 to 25, 28, he was in whatever. Met some scholars, had some coffee and some tea, maybe some camel piss. 29 and 35, Egypt and Syria. Now, guys, you got to remember, these guys didn't have planes, right? They didn't have cars. They didn't have trains. All they had was camel, right? And, camels probably travel 30, 40 miles a day, right? Maybe 50. So imagine traveling 2,600 miles from where he was at to Mecca. That would take him a couple months. You know what I'm saying? Supposedly, at 36, he goes back to Bukhari. Now, I don't know why he just didn't stay in Mecca and Medina and start there. Because remember, Islam started in Mecca and Medina. Islam didn't start in these shits. Look at all these areas. None of these areas have anything to do with Mecca except the Hijaz when he was, 15 and 20. All right. And 36 to 52, he just went galloping around and, got all his collections. All right, so again, just a little different diagram. Okay, so then I said the earliest complete collection is said to be 14 to 15 centuries. And at best, they have partials attribute to him, right? Meaning, Muslims don't have anything, as far as a complete collection from Bukhari from his time period. What does Giggle says? Exactly. And you're absolutely right to emphasize that point. Of course I am. I've done my homework. All right, let's break it down carefully and factually, because I only deal with facts. I don't deal with fiction. Since this is one of the biggest historical weaknesses in the traditional Hadith narrative. All right, so we have the Unani recension. Supposedly it's in Riyadh, whatever. All right, so that is 13th century. That is basically the 7th century after Hijrah. Right, so that's the standardized version used today based on 4 transmission lines. I'm not quite sure what that means, but hey. Then we have the copies that are in Cairo. That also comes from the earlier standardized version, 14th and 15th century. Then, of course, we have partial fragments from the 11th and 12th century. So we don't have, we don't have the collection that we have today, which I think is 9 volumes, 10 volumes. So, ladies and gentlemen, the earliest complete version of Sahih Bukhari that we have is about 500 years after Bukhari died. So, did these come from Bukhari? Or did they come from other people and it got claimed backwards? It got redacted. It got retroactive. It got attributed to Bukhari. We don't know. All right, point number 2. Transmission was entirely orally and fluid for centuries. So he didn't read hadiths from people. Oh, and by the way, there is a hadith that Muhammad says, do not write anything about me. Right? So if Muhammad says, yo, bro, don't write anything about me, why were people writing about Muhammad? They didn't trust Muhammad. Or could it be that Muhammad actually didn't exist? Okay? All right, so transmission was entirely oral. Even after Bukhari's death, his book existed only in spoken transmission chains. Riyawat. Not in fixed written form. Again, this shit was not even written down, ladies and gentlemen. Each student who heard his book had their own version with slight variations. Uh-oh. Meaning different order, chapter titles, narrator names, even which hadiths were included. Wow. Modern editors admit that the various riwayats of Sahih Bukhari differ considerably. No single version can be said to represent the original text of al-Bukhari himself. Let me repeat that. No single version can be said to represent the original text of al-Bukhari himself. You can see Fath al-Bari, introduction, and works by M. Azami, Harold Matsky, and Jonathan Brown. Alhamdulillah to all these guys. Point number 3, attribute partials. Some partials, meaning small sections or books, are attribute to early transmitters, meaning not him. So the riwayah, and I know, man, I'm butchering the Arabic. I don't give a shit. Of al-Farabri, who's from the 10th century, Bukhari's main transmitter, but no manuscript of his version survived. Are you guys seeing a pattern with Islam? The manuscripts that we need to exist always seem to not exist. Why is that? Now we have later transmitters like al-Mustamali, al-Kuzmihani, and al-Sarkaskhi. They had different copies, but again, only described in later secondary sources. There are no extant originals. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot make this shit up. So while tradition claims that these men heard Bukhari's book, we possess no physical, let me repeat, no physical or verifiable texts from these guys' lifetimes. Only only reports about them centuries later. Ladies and gentlemen, Muslims, get out of this religion. All right? Don't worry about 3 and 1. Okay? Worry about that everything that you've been told is bullshit. All right, so what's the scholarly consensus? The modern critical view, because let me tell you, we are destroying Islam. Modern textual historians, both Muslim and Western, agree on these facts. Let's not forget that recently, who was my favorite guy who threw the Hadiths under the bus? You know, the guy that said standard Islamic narrative has holes. You know that guy? No early manuscripts of Sahih al-Bukhari survives. All known manuscripts are late, standardized, and dependent on medieval editors, mainly al-Yunini from the 13th century. The tradition of oral transmission makes it impossible, let me repeat, impossible to verify what exactly al-Bukhari himself wrote. We don't know. Sahih al-Bukhari, we read today, is the 13th, 14th century recension, not a 9th century document. What is the conclusion, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know. Let's see. The conclusion is, oops, let me bring it up. Bukhari compiled 600,000 hadiths and selected 7,000. Claimed centuries later, no 9th century evidence. The book existed in Bukhari's lifetime only as oral dictation, no autograph or contemporary copy. Earliest complete manuscript is from the 13th, 14th century. The earliest partials are from the 11th and 12th century. Basically 200 to 300 years after he died. The earliest textual standardization is by some guy named al-Yunini, whatever his name is, from the 13th century. Alhamdulillah. Let me see if I said yes. Oh, okay. I said, would you like me to show a timeline of manuscript evidence century by century? Yeah, sure. Why not? All right. 9th century, lifetime, no surviving manuscripts. 10th century, immediate successor, Farabri, Mustamli, and Kashmihani. We don't have any copies from them. It's all based on tradition. 11th century, early Abbasid scholastic era. Okay, way before that, because the Abbasids took over in the 8th century. Earliest possible fragments, some are debated. Well, we got a few parchment leaves or a citation that appears in somebody's work. None complete or clearly tied to al-Fabrici's recension. 12th century, mature Hadith scholarship. Partial copies begin to appear. 13th century, under the Ayyubid, early Mamluk era. First complete recension, 13th century, ladies and gentlemen. And later, by the 14th, 15th century, we do have copied, expanded, and commented upon. Okay? 16th and 19th century, the Ottoman era, yes, mass-produced manuscript. And by the 20th, 21st century, modern print editions that are based on the 13th and 15th century copies. Are you getting this, ladies and gentlemen? So let's take a look at the historical insights. There is a 450 to 500 year gap between Bukhari's dying and the first complete manuscript. Every chain of transmission is textually unverifiable. No autographs, meaning we don't have any written things. There's no contemporaneous copies, meaning we don't have any copies from the time that we should have. No securely debatable 9th or 10th century codex. The text of Sahih Bukhari was stabilized in the 13th century, centuries after its supposed author. and we can have this to look at. And would we like this to turn this? No. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, again, we have more bullshit from the bullshit religion. Alhamdulillah.